Platt, and today we try a beer named after a jazz legend. That's next to Platt's Beer of the Week. So the particular beer we have today comes to us from North Coast Brewing. It is named Brother Thelonious. Now, we've tried a beer before from North Coast. We tried their Old Rasputin. Apparently they like naming beers after people out there. A little background in North Coast. North Coast is located in Fort Bragg, California, along the Mendocino Coast, so we're talking about Northern California. The brewery itself was founded in 1988 by Tom Allen, Doug Moody, and Mark Rudrich. They did roughly about 400 barrels that first year. Doesn't seem like a lot, but the first year, they eventually, trust me, they grew a lot more over the years. Today, the company is ran by CEO Jennifer Owen and brewmaster Chuck Martin. Now, one of the first big moments for North Coast was in 1996 when they purchased the rights to a brewery called Acme Brewing. Yes, there was something called Acme Brewing. It had nothing to do with Bugs Bunny or whatever. It actually at one time was one of probably the largest brewing in the Bay Area, opened back in 1907. But like a lot of breweries, after Prohibition and the expansion of the big three in the U.S., they just really didn't survive. But North Coast picked up the name, and I believe today they brew a couple of products, kind of as an homage to the old Acme Brewing. Their slogan at North Coast is making the world better one pint at a time. That kind of is alluding to a lot of their charitable efforts. Also, they do a ton of environmental efforts. One of the big things they sponsor each year is the Monterey Jazz Festival. Ties in perfectly with this beer. For those rock and roll fans out there, you might remember it was the Monterey Pop Festival that Jimi Hendrix had his big kind of breakout moment. But the Monterey Jazz Festival is one of the great music festivals in the U.S. And if you get a chance to go make it up there, I haven't, but maybe someday. They are, speaking of the Monterey Jazz Festival, proceeds from this particular beer go to an educational music educational effort that's tied in with the jazz festival. So in a certain way, I'm drinking this beer for the children, which makes me a good person. I'm just kidding there. As far as some of their more charitable efforts, they are what's called a certified B Corporation, which I believe has to do with environmental efforts. They also are non-GMO certified. So if you take your beer drinking, want to tie it in with your being kind of an activist or whatever, North Coast Brewing may be the brewery for you. Real quick, let's talk about some of their other beers. First is Scrimshaw, 4.5% ABV. This is a Pilsner. The term Scrimshaw refers to a type of engraving that was done on walrus tusk and certain types of ivory, usually done by some of the sailors there on the West Coast. We're talking about back in the 1800s when there's a little different sensitivity back then. Next is Prankster, spelt with a Q. I think that's an homage to the Belgians. 7.6% ABV. This is a Belgian golden ale. This is one of their more awarded beers. It won gold at the 2002 World Beer Cup. So again, highly thought of. Next, we have Laguna Baja, 5% ABV. This is a dark Mexican lager. Now, I mentioned this beer along with Scrimshaw, which is a Pilsner. North Coast generally leans toward the more big-bodied ales. They do a lot of barrel-aged stuff. So there's just a few lagers, and I want to point those out. Laguna Baja is one of those. Lastly, we have the Class of 88. This is a barley wine that comes in at 10.2% ABV, which is a pretty big beer, but for barley wine, it's not really that high. This is a collaboration with Rogue and Duchette Brewing. All three of these breweries are pillars in the craft beer movement, but they also all started in 1988, thus Class of 88. Well, before we try this particular beer, though, let's check out the stats. So I thought today, before we try this particular beer, there's probably some of you out there that don't know who the Brother Thelonious is that they're referring to in this beer. And it is jazz legend Thelonious Monk. Thelonious lived from 1917 to 1982. He was a jazz pianist and composer. How I was brought made aware of Thelonious was actually through Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was one of my favorite basketball players as a kid in the 70s and 80s. And he was always talking about how he was a big jazz fan, particularly of Thelonious Monk. I remember him having a house fire, I want to say maybe early 80s, late 70s, something like that. And he lost his record collection back in the days of the big 78 or whatever. And a lot of fans and everybody kind of donated records to him, help him rebuild this jazz collection. It's always kind of a cool story. And again, just made me always think about Thelonious Monk. It always kind of stuck in my head. Thelonious is one of 5 jazz artists to appear on the cover of Time magazine. We're talking about the likes of like Louis Armstrong, Dave Brubeck. So that tells you how big of an influence he had in the world in general, but also the jazz world. His career started when he was roughly about 17. He played church organ for a traveling evangelist, eventually caught the jazz bug, made his way up to the jazz nightclubs there in Manhattan in the mid-40s, and thus they say the rest is history. Now, if you're not a big fan of jazz or blues music, you might not know this, but a lot of our great jazz and blues artists started either in a church choir, playing the church organ, traveling evangelists. They started at the church when they were young and then eventually worked their way out to, to where they eventually, achieved. A lot of your blues guys took similar paths. I would be lying to say I know a lot of Thelonious' work or that I'm a huge fan, but I definitely respect the work of those classic jazz artists. So if you get a chance, check out some of his stuff. I also respect the work of a good brewmaster, so let's drink a beer. This is nice and dark, a dark brown. I mean, with a slight, looking into the light now, I get a slight hint of ruby in there. It's a dark brown to maybe a little bit of ruby. Yes, I got a nice thin khaki head. Oh, there's plenty of malt on the nose there. Let's give her a try. That's nice. Nice malty sweetness, but it's a mature malt sweetness. It's not just candy sweet. There's some toffee and there's some those dark fruit notes and yeah, just darker notes. You do notice the alcohol. It's not a burn, but you're like, oh, this has got substance. I think we're at 7.4% ABV. So again, a beer of substance, but it's still drinkable. It's still approachable. It's got body, but it's not viscous. Like I said, the sweetness is there, but it's not. It's more mature sweetness. There's just different notes. It's not just a sugar sweetness. You may pick up some of those kind of brown sugar, maybe a slight hint of maple, maybe slight, darker sweetness notes. I can see where almost some molasses would come in this. Yeah, no, really nice beer. Very drinkable though, even at 7.4%. Again, those darker notes, it's still very drinkable. I think they hit a really nice spot here with this beer. Obviously, once you start brewing bigger beers, you could really kind of get lost in the idea of bigger and bolder, and we're going to beat up your palate. That's not this, but they're just going to say, hey, we brought you deliciousness, And I think this is a nice little beer. This is something that you enjoy, though. I would definitely not chug this in any way. This is a beer you need to enjoy. Would go into like a nice snifter, style glass. But yeah, nice, well executed beer. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or beers that you'd like me to try, you can always leave them in the comment section or contact me on the Twitter page. Well, until next time, bottoms up.